Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning. My name is Stephen Brown, and I am the CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I'd like to start by offering my condolences to the family of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was a person beloved to his family and his community, and he will be missed. Je voudrais commencer par présenter mes condoléances à la famille de Hardeep Singh Nijjar. C'est une personne aimée de sa famille et de sa communauté, et il va nous manquer. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister informed Canadians that our government has reason to believe that on the evening of June 18th, a Canadian citizen was assassinated by a foreign government right in front of a place of worship. Hier, le Premier ministre nous a informé les Canadiens que le gouvernement a des raisons de croire que le soir du 18 juin, un citoyen canadien a été assassiné par un gouvernement étranger, et ce, devant un lieu de culte. Il s'agit d'une attaque sans précédent contre la souveraineté canadienne. Point final. This is an unprecedented attack against Canadian sovereignty. Full stop. We're all in this together. Because when a Canadian is attacked, when he or she has the audacity to speak about human rights and justice, all of us are at risk. Now, unfortunately, the revelations yesterday were painful, but could not, for many in our communities, be characterized as shocking. We, alongside virtually every other credible expert, had warned that it was only a matter of time before the actions of the Indian government reached Canadian shores. Our jointly published report with the Sikh organization on the dangers of the Rashtriya Swamyang Savak Sangh, or the RSS, the Indian far-right parliamentary organization, paramilitary organization that has found its ideological home in the Modi government, received national media attention. It also detailed the level of harassment already being faced by Canadian Muslim communities, domestically. And unfortunately, it did not result in significant action by the federal or provincial governments at the time. Notre rapport, publié conjointement avec l'Organisation mondiale sikh sur les dangers du RSS, a également détaillé le niveau de harcèlement auquel sont déjà confrontées les communautés musulmanes canadiennes au niveau national. Et malheureusement, cela n'a donné lieu à aucune action significative de la part des gouvernements fédéraux et provinciaux. And while the idea that the Indian government is involved in such brazen acts of violence might shock many Canadians, for millions of Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and other minorities in India, this type of violence and utter disregard for the rule of law is an everyday occurrence. Malheureusement et tragiquement, nous ne sommes plus dans l'Inde de Gandhi. Sadly and tragically, we are no longer in Gandhi's India. This is no longer the world's largest liberal democracy. Ce n'est plus la plus grande démocratie libérale au monde. The Indian government has been taken over by a far-right, extremist, paramilitary organization called the RSS. This type of impunity is not an anomaly. It is by design. C'est par conception. What we're talking about here, to be clear, is a deliberate act of violence by a foreign government on Canadian soil against one of our own citizens. This act of state-sponsored terrorism must be met with the highest response. And so today, we join the Sikh community and our partners at the World Sikh Organization of Canada in calling for action from the Government of Canada. At this moment, it is paramount that the killers of a fellow Canadian are brought to justice, and protections must be put in place immediately to ensure the safety of all Canadians from all threats, both foreign and domestic. along with the powerful calls for diplomatic consequences, an end to intelligence sharing, and a public inquiry my colleague just mentioned, we at NCCM are calling for 4 additional actions. 1, the immediate recalling of Canada's ambassador to India. 2, an initiation of the process of expulsion of the Indian ambassador to Canada, High Commissioner Sri Sanjay Kumar Verma. 3, a formal freeze on trade negotiations between India and Canada, including but not limited to the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA. And 4, together with the WSO, we today call for the immediate banning of the RSS under the listing provisions in the Criminal Code and the removal of its agents from Canada. En français, parallèlement aux appels de mes collègues à des fortes conséquences diplomatiques à la fin du partage de renseignements de la tenue d'une enquête publique, nous réclamons 4 actions supplémentaires, dont 1, le rappel immédiat de l'ambassadeur canadien en Inde. 2, une initiation du processus d'expulsion de l'ambassadeur indien au Canada, le haut-commissaire Sri Sanjay Kumar Verma. 3, un gel formel des négociations commerciales entre l'Inde et le Canada, y compris, mais sans illimiter, l'accord de partenariat économique global, ou CEPA. Et en collaboration avec le WSO, nous appelons aujourd'hui à l'interdiction immédiate du RSS en vertu des dispositions d'inscription du Code criminel et au retrait de ses agents au Canada. We must understand that this assassination of one of our fellow citizens on the streets of our country in broad daylight in front of a place of worship affects each and every one of us. Il faut comprendre que cet assassinat d'un de nos citoyens dans les rues de notre pays, devant un lieu de culte, touche chacun de nous, et c'est complètement inacceptable. This assassination was an attack on all of us as Canadians. This is why we must take action, and we must take action right now. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Can you clarify, are you formally accusing the RSS of murdering Singh Nijjar?
Pardon?
Are you formally accusing the RSS of murdering Mr. Singh Nijjar?
Not formally accusing the RSS of murdering Mr. Singh Nijjar, but what we are saying is that, and you can see this in the report that was published conjointly with the WSO, members of the Muslim community and the Sikh community and many other communities have been complaining for years that they have been targeted by harassment and threats by individuals and associations affiliated with the RSS. And for years, we've been talking to this about this topic to the Canadian government, and nothing has been done, which is why we are asking right now for the Canadian government to ban the RSS from Canada and expel its agents from the country.
Is there fear right now for others who are Sikh or Muslim, since there's a large Muslim, the largest Muslim minority, I should say, in India, of further violence or being targeted? And is there confidence that Canadian officials can keep those communities here in Canada safe?
We believe that the Canadian government has the ability to keep all Canadian citizens safe. But yes, when members of the community have been talking about being targeted and discriminated against and harassed, not in India, but in Canada for years. And we can see in Canada our Prime Minister getting up in the House of Commons and saying that there is evidence, credible evidence to suggest that the agent of a foreign country is assassinating religious minorities in our country. They're killing Canadians in broad daylight in our country. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And anybody would be wise to be concerned about this. Not just ethnic minorities, not just religious minorities. I mean, in Canada, if you cannot have an opinion about another foreign government without having to worry about walking outside and worrying, is there going to be a foreign agent that's going to gun you down in the streets? What's going on? So I have every confidence that the Canadian government will take all measures necessary to protect Canadian citizens.
Parlant de protection, do you speak French?
I understand it.
OK. Parlant de protection, vous demandez davantage de protection pour la diaspora sikh au Canada. Qu'est-ce que vous demandez exactement?
So, you can hear me, but I'll say we are specifically asking for Sikh activists those that are been identified as having threats. And there are a number of Canadian Sikhs that have been identified as having a threat to their life, and we are asking for the government of Canada to provide protection for these Sikhs in Canada.
Those Sikhs approaching, like, is the RCMP warned those Sikhs that there's a threat to them, or is it the other way around? Is it the community asking Canadian law enforcement for protection?
I think it goes both ways, and there have been a number of cases where officials have warned them that there was a threat to their life.
Comment vous jugez la réaction des politiciens canadiens des différents partis? Ce matin, on avait Pierre Poilievre qui disait on doit quand même attendre d'avoir tous les faits là, vraiment avant de dire si la réaction du gouvernement était justifiée.
Je pense que la réaction... je pense que la réaction, d'abord, l'approche qu'on réclame, c'est une approche qui tient en compte tous les partis. C'est pas une approche partisane. C'est sûr que c'est un événement incroyable, mais la réalité fait en sorte que le premier ministre a quand même dit qu'un citoyen canadien a été tué par un agent du gouvernement de l'Inde. Alors, je pense qu'on appelle tous les politiciens à prendre cela extrêmement au sérieux et de travailler ensemble pour s'assurer que tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes aient la protection physique et aussi que nos libertés soient protégées.
Can I just get you to expand on that in English? The official opposition leader today suggested the Prime Minister hasn't been transparent with all the facts in this case. Do you think we need to hear more facts from the government, or what do you make of Pierre Poilievre's statement?
What I'm interested in is making sure that this is that partisan politics stays completely out of this. Right? This is a Canadian citizen, somebody with a Canadian passport that was gunned down in broad daylight. So we need to make sure that all Canadian politicians are working together to, one, understand exactly how this happened, but two, and more importantly, make sure that this doesn't happen again, that all Canadians are safe. People should not have to be worried about getting shot when they're walking out of a place of worship in Canada.
Vous avez mentionné l'accord de coopération économique avec l'Inde. Qu'est-ce qui se passe si le gouvernement continue d'avoir espoir en ça ou ne se retire pas des négociations?
Le fait est tellement sérieux, c'est tellement un enjeu incroyable que l'idée même de continuer des relations avec le gouvernement de l'Inde avant qu'on soit capable de s'assurer que les Canadiens et les Canadiennes sont sécures, je pense que on doit mettre nos priorités à l'ordre. Le gouvernement canadien a la responsabilité de s'assurer de la sécurité de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes et maintenant de mettre tous leurs efforts dans les mesures pour assurer la protection des Canadiens et des Canadiennes de toutes les communautés. Ça doit être ça, la priorité numéro 1. Après ça, une fois que notre sécurité est assurée et que tous ceux qui ont commis cet acte haineux que la justice soit rendue, après ça, peut-être on pourra penser aux accords économiques. Mais avant ça, maintenant, ce n'est pas le temps de penser au traité. Le temps maintenant, c'est de penser aux citoyens et citoyennes canadiennes.
Are either of your organizations aware of anyone that's currently in hiding because they don't feel the Canadian law enforcement agencies or government has their backs when it comes to extrajudicial attempts on their lives?
We are aware of Canadian Sikhs that are under threat. They've been advised to make changes to their pattern of living, whether moving or otherwise. So we are aware of threats to Canadian Sikhs at the moment, yes.
Est-ce qu'on a un nombre?
I don't have an exact number, but I can say that there are a number. I mean, so I don't have an exact number on how many are affected.
Threats personally?
I have not, no.
Who's been advising them? You said they've been advised to take precautions.
It's been a combination, as I answered before, whereas some of the community members have advised local officials of threats against their lives. Local officials have also advised some community members of some threats to their life as well.
You've both referenced the public inquiry into foreign interference. If you look at the terms of reference in terms of protections for diaspora communities, there is, a term to look at protections for those communities in the context of democratic institutions being imperiled. Would you like to see that scope expanded to look at protections for diaspora communities more broadly, outside of, election interference, for example?
That's a good question. I would tend, with the news we just heard and the announcement yesterday, I think it makes sense to add that to the scope. Certainly, having a basic sense of security, I think, is a common. It's something we need to ensure in this country. And if foreign interference and foreign countries are affecting that, I think we need to look into that.
What should Canada pursue as a relationship with India? We've heard the question about the trade agreement that now is in limbo. There's a huge diaspora communities from many different minorities within India, and also the Hindus as well. So what is the future of that relationship, in your opinion?
We believe Canada needs to stand by its values and not compromise on those, whether it's freedom of expression, protection for minorities, and any relationship internationally needs to have a foundation of our core Canadian values.
Quelles sont vos attentes par rapport aux alliés? On peut penser aux États-Unis ou à la Grande-Bretagne, les alliés du Canada. Vous avez dit dans votre allocution que le Canada doit leur parler de cette chose-là. Quelles sont vos attentes?
We've seen announcements come in from the United States, from Australia as well. We're hoping for all the Five Eyes provide support in this. I expect that they'll see the threat that this sort of foreign interference can have on a country such as Canada and other countries of similar values. I think it's important for these countries to really identify and recognize the threat that our countries have when we deal with nations that don't share similar values, that are open to foreign interference. When we spoke about stopping intelligence sharing, and really from this Canadian Sikh community's perspective, we were expressing this concern in 2018 when that initial intelligence sharing agreement was announced. It's led to deaths in the past, intelligence sharing in Canada for Sikhs. And we are aware that this information is not used with respect to protecting minorities or protecting foreign integrity.
Do you think Canada's stuck in a bit of a bind now with India because they have emphasized an alliance with them economically so much in order to check against growing influence by China on the world stage?
I'll say I don't. In concept, we are supportive of seeking trade agreements. I think it's something that supports the economy, and every country should be seeking those. What we're not supportive of is trading lives for trade agreements for economic growth. And if we have to trade, a certain minority group to make such an agreement, I think we would be against that.
What should Canadians understand, perhaps, about the history that between India and the Sikh community, that the greater context here that you're concerned about?
The announcement yesterday, I believe, is a tip of the iceberg. This is not the first time that somebody from an Indian diplomat has been kicked out of Canada for foreign interference on the Canadian Sikh community. And so there is a pattern here. The Canadian Sikh community has been speaking out about it for decades now. And for my part, I really resonated with what Mukhbir Singh mentioned yesterday. The younger generation that grew up in Canada, they grew up hearing stories about the persecution, about the fear of speaking out a little too much and you might get on a list or be targeted. And so to see that happening right now in 2023 in Canada, it certainly is shocking, and I hope the larger community sees that and understands how truly shocking this is, to see a Canadian attacked on Canadian soil by a foreign country. I think we can't understate how shocking that news is.
All right, so we'll go to a question on Zoom. We have time for one last question. So Palak, if you want, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, thanks. I think this question is probably best for Mukhbir Singh. I'd like to get your comment. Sorry, I'd like to get your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments today. He said that he made the decision to come public with intelligence because he wanted to speak with Canada's allies and have a quote solid grounding on what was happening. And assumably, it was also to speak directly to Prime Minister Modi at the G20. At the same time, he is saying that Canadians do have a quote right to know about these kinds of threats. What do you make of these comments, and should this information have been made public beforehand, in your view?
So certainly we're, I'll say we were happy to see that our Prime Minister Trudeau spoke about this publicly. This is not a surprise or a secret that the Canadian Sikh community was not aware of. I'll reiterate what my colleague just mentioned. What I think is most important here, and I think maybe one of the objectives is to not make this a partisan issue, and bringing it collectively with the other parties. I think it sent a message, not just in Canada but internationally, that Canada does not tolerate these types of events and actions in our country, and any sort of affront on our integrity. We will stand united and speak against it. So I think that sent a strong message yesterday that Canada will not tolerate these type of events.
Follow-up, Palak?
Yes, thank you. And just as a follow-up, we've talked about the inquiry itself, and you've mentioned that the scope of that should be broadened. I'd just like to push you a little bit. Are there specific protections for diaspora communities that you would like to see that could come out of that inquiry?
So certainly we'd like it to be acknowledged, the role of foreign interference and how it affects minority groups in Canada, including Canadian Sikhs. When we look at the physical threat to life in Canada, I think it's something that will really help ground us to the realities of what a lot of visible minorities face in Canada. A lot of them have come to Canada, retreating from countries where they were persecuted, whether financially, whether due to their culture or religion. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that a large number of immigrants that come to Canada come fleeing persecution. And when we look into foreign interference and the role of that in Canada, I think it goes hand in hand in looking at maybe the physical protections that is needed for certain Canadians here.
Any other questions? This brings an end to the press conference. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Recording stopped.
Thank you guys. Merci.